This is a murder trial. This is not a drug trial. The drug charges are the tail wagging the dog. What are we doing wasting our time over these other charges? Clean up your case. No juror sitting on this trial is going to years later say, I sat on a drug possession and trafficking case, and oh, that person was also charged with murder. This is a murder case. Treat it as such. 7 years after the murders of 2 teenage girls in Delphi, Indiana, a man has been convicted for their brutal slayings, bringing an end to a case that captured the attention of the nation. Plus, a Utah mother accused of poisoning her husband and then writing a children's book about grief again requests the court to set bail before her approaching murder trial. And the retrial of Karen Reed gears up as attorneys wrangle over potential new evidence, setting the stage for the state of play. All this and more this week on Courtroom Confidential. Thank you for joining us again. Lots to catch you up on this week. We are recording this on Thursday, November 14th, 2024. Let's jump right in. First, an Indiana man was found guilty on Monday of killing 2 girls on a wooded trail in 2017 in a case that garnered national attention, spawned podcasts, and riveted true crime fans drawn to the case twists and turns. The bodies of the girls, Liberty German, age 14, and her friend Abigail Williams, age 13, were found a day after they went missing during a hike in Delphi, Indiana, a city about 80 miles northwest of Indianapolis, on February 13th, 2017. 5 years later, the man, Richard Allen of Delphi, was arrested and charged. Jurors found Allen guilty of 2 counts of murder and 2 counts of murder while committing or attempting to commit kidnapping. The jury began deliberations last Thursday. Allen is scheduled to be sentenced on December 20th and could face up to 130 years in prison. What's happening here? This case, like some that we see every so often, really created a lot of strong feelings from people on both sides, and I think rightfully so. First of all, you have 2 of the more brutal murders that we have talked about on this channel against 2 teenage girls just living their lives. The kind of killings that I think we all could agree is something that everyone in the community would get behind, making sure that the perpetrator of those crimes was captured and brought to justice. But in this case, we have seen a lot of folks who have followed this very carefully having mixed feelings, not feeling so great about the conviction in this case. And I think to some extent, rightfully so. The way in which Richard Allen was held in custody for over a year in solitary confinement, many people feel was an injustice, that there was something wrong with that. The way that this man was, and I think there was convincing evidence that he was suffering from some sort of mental break, deterioration, a person held in those conditions that caused them to suffer this breakdown. None of us feel good about that. And we feel that that was an injustice. But I think one thing to appreciate and understand is that those 2 things are not necessarily mutually exclusive. That Richard Allen can both be held in custody in a way that none of us are happy with, and at the same time have committed these brutal murders. He may have been subjected to mistreatment, and he still may have honestly confessed to his involvement in these crimes. And that is really what this all comes down to. I think in the jurors' minds, they had 60 confessions, 60 statements that he had made to some degree admitting his involvement in these horrible, horrible murders. That is a lot for jurors to ignore. And yes, there was evidence that perhaps he was just making these confessions to get himself out of a situation. Perhaps he was making these confessions because he felt so broken down. But 60 is a lot, and that's a lot for jurors to get around. But to me, the thing that bothers me most about this case is I think the feelings of many of the people in this community, many of the people listening or watching this podcast, those feelings of disquiet, uncertainty, not feeling great could have been avoided had the judge handled this case differently. And I think this judge was in a very difficult position. I think she had a lot of very important and difficult decisions to make. I agree with a lot of those decisions. But one of the things I don't agree with was the tremendous lack of transparency in this case. It's one thing to want to protect the integrity of a trial. And in a case like this, taking place in a small community where they're now being bombarded with national media attention, you can understand why she would have concerns over the integrity of this trial. But we're talking about all of these things taking place. I'm about to list them for you. One, they chose a jury from outside of the jurisdiction, an hour away, then drove those people an hour away from their homes to be sequestered inside of a hotel with no contact with the outside world, including electronics. Television time was monitored. Visits with their loved ones was monitored. You had a gag order in place where none of the parties involved could talk about this case at all. You had no cameras inside of the courtroom. Reporters that were allowed inside, and by the way, not guaranteed a spot. They had to go through a lottery every single day to make sure they had a spot to listen to this case. They were not allowed electronics, so they're taking notes by hand. And from my understanding of speaking to some of those people who were inside of the courtroom, it was difficult to hear what was going on anyways. So you had all of this difficulty and roadblocks and obstructions put up for our ability in the outside world to understand what was happening. Was justice being done? So if at the end of the day, some people are feeling questionable about that, some people are having a hard time reconciling the things that they've heard with the verdict, I place a lot of that blame at the way that this case was handled, that lack of transparency. I hope that there was enough evidence, but I cannot give you that answer because I'm getting all this information secondhand. There's still a gag order in place. Who knows when we'll actually see the trial transcripts? But I hope for the integrity of the justice system that justice was done and that there was evidence beyond those confessions, or that those confessions are reliable enough, because these are heinous, heinous murders. And I want to see some sort of justice brought to their families. But what do you guys think? Do you think justice was served, or do you have doubts? Please let us know in the comments. A Utah judge has denied a repeated request for bail from a mother accused of killing her husband. In a hearing Tuesday, Judge Richard Mrazek said, quote, "There simply are not reasonably available means of mitigating her risk to the community and to herself, or the strong incentive for her to flee the jurisdiction of the court." During that same hearing, Mrazek granted a motion from prosecutors to dismiss 2 counts of distributing a controlled substance, second-degree felonies. The judge also denied a request from Richins' attorney to try her charge for attempted murder in a separate trial from the aggravated murder charge, ruling the 2 were part of a common scheme or plan. Mrazek did, however, separate 4 charges related to mortgage fraud that allegedly occurred in 2021, ruling that they should be presented as part of a separate trial, as Richins' attorneys requested to keep their trial fair and not prejudice the jury, saying, quote, "There is too much temporal distance and too much dissimilarity." Finally, the judge denied a request to have 12 jurors on the case rather than 8. He said Utah's law requiring 8 instead of 12, quote, "may be on the wrong side of history, but it is the law he took an oath to uphold, and the U.S. Supreme Court has ruled a less than 12-person jury does not violate the 6th Amendment." In the statement after the hearing, Richins' attorney Kathy Nestor said, quote, "With 2 charges dismissed and 4 others severed, the defense stands more confident. The case against our client is rapidly narrowing, exposing deeper weaknesses with each step. Trial is scheduled to begin in April." What's happening here? First of all, I want to talk a little bit about Kouri Richins being denied bail. First of all, I appreciate and understand that she is charged with murder, and I understand that she tried to murder her husband, according to the allegations, a previous time. And when that didn't work, she redoubled her efforts. I realize how violent that is, how dangerous that is, that this was a planned, deliberated murder, perhaps even for financial gain. I also realize that since her time in custody, she attempted to influence a witness with this letter that she apparently was going to or attempted to show to her mother to try to control how people were going to testify in court. All of that is bad. All of that is awful. But we're talking about denying bail. We're not talking about setting a very high bail. We're talking about zero chance, no opportunity to be able to get out to defend oneself before trial. Bail isn't saying release this person. Bail is saying allow this person to be outside based on tremendous conditions sometimes you place on them, pending their trial, where they may go to prison for the rest of their lives. I've dealt with a lot of murder cases in my career, and it is rare for them to be denied bail whatsoever. Usually it's only in cases where somebody's facing the death penalty or life without parole. So in a case like this, and again, let me just play devil's advocate for a moment. No prior criminal history, ties to the community, her family, her sons live there. The idea that she would leave without them is, I think, a strong argument for granting bail. All of these things, I think, at least should give the judge a reason to grant bail, even if that bail is high. Okay, I've said my piece. I know people feel strongly about this. I just feel like too often judges don't give a defendant the opportunity for even the chance to get out before their trial. Just give them that chance to defend themselves before trial. Anyhow, let's talk more about the charges that were dropped. First of all, these drug charges were dropped. I think that was good for the defense, but I think it was also good for the prosecution. It was, in fact, based upon the prosecution's own motion. And I like this because this is a murder trial. This is not a drug trial. The drug charges are the tail wagging the dog. What are we doing wasting our time over these other charges? Clean up your case. No juror sitting on this trial is going to years later say, I sat on a drug possession and trafficking case, and oh, that person was also charged with murder. This is a murder case. Treat it as such. Streamline it. Get down to the business that you need to handle here. Same thing with the mortgage fraud charges being severed. I think that's good for the defense. That's not going to become a character assassination, but I think it's also helpful for the prosecution. Get this case down to what you actually want the jurors to decide, rather than having to go through proving all the elements of mortgage fraud. You imagine putting on this murder trial and in the middle of it, up springs a mortgage fraud case that you have to prove to these jurors and argue to them in your closing arguments. Now, the one caveat, the one difficulty that may present is if the prosecution has a problem with presenting motive because that mortgage fraud case has been severed. Because I do think they're going to argue that financial gain was some part of the motive behind all of this, but that will remain to be seen. And finally, being denied the request to separate the prior attempted murder with the murder, the judge got that right. This is all part of a common scheme or plan. You know, nice try, but no surprise on the part of the defense. This wasn't like, oh, I made an attempt at murder, I changed my mind, and years later, now you've charged me with murder. This was, I failed once, I redoubled my efforts, and I came back after it till I got the job done. One last point that I thought was really interesting in this case was the idea of 8 jurors instead of 12. The defense made a request for 12. Whenever I see a jurisdiction where they use less than 12 jurors, I don't know why, but it gives me pause. It makes me feel uneasy. I'm used to a jurisdiction where every case, from misdemeanor to death penalty, has 12 jurors deciding that. It's not a magic number. There's no science behind 12. I think we can just all agree that 12 is kind of what we're used to. But it's important because when you start to move away from that, down from 12, I think the defense just has a much more difficult job, because now that net that they're able to cast, the diverse opinions that they're able to have, the ability, that chance for one person to buy their argument and stand up against the other 11 members of that jury. They just don't have that with each juror that you take away. So in a case of this magnitude, where you're dealing with someone who could go to prison for the better part of their life, it would make me uneasy as an attorney with only 8 opportunities to try to convince one person to see things your way. But what do you guys think? Am I wrong on this bail issue? Am I wrong on the jury issue? I always appreciate being told when I'm wrong. Please let us know in the comments. Mansfield woman Karen Reed returned to a Norfolk courthouse Wednesday for attorneys to discuss a series of motions ahead of her upcoming retrial, including a request from both sides to push back the trial start date, explaining that there was simply not enough time given the current schedule to prepare for the upcoming trial. Both sides suggested April as a more realistic start date. Much of the need for new time is based on new testing planned by the Commonwealth. During the first trial, experts examined data from Reed's Lexus SUV. Prosecutors say she was driving the Lexus when she hit and killed her boyfriend, Boston police officer John O'Keefe. Prosecutors now say there were, quote, irregularities in the data, and they want to analyze the data again using a new expert. They say the infotainment system in the SUV has 3 boards of data and only 1 was analyzed. Reed's attorneys also asked Judge Beverly Cannoni to deny the prosecution's request for phone and text records from Karen Reed's father, William Reed. Quote, the Commonwealth's motion is a fishing expedition and an inappropriate attempt to invade Mr. Reed's privacy, argued Alan Jackson and David Giannetti in their memorandum. Not to be outdone, Reed's attorneys also filed a motion asking for Norfolk County District Attorney Michael Morrissey's personal emails and phone records. The defense believes Morrissey used his personal email to contact judges and employees at the court about the witness intimidation case against a blogger who is covering Reed's case. No rulings were issued on any of these issues by the judge. The next hearing was scheduled for November 26. All right, what's happening here? We've got new testing, new experts, a new prosecutor, Mr. Hank Brennan. Folks, this is going to be a whole new trial. I think if you followed closely the first trial, there was no question that the prosecution case fell apart when it should have had the most impact, and that was with the experts. All through the trial, we were waiting to hear from the accident reconstruction expert. Did her vehicle have an impact with someone or anything or not? And when we got to that part, no pun intended, the wheels fell off. The medical examiner, were his injuries the result of a car accident or not? And still, we couldn't get an answer to that. When the prosecution, the Commonwealth, needed to bring this all home, their case started to fall apart. Now, there's not much that they can do about the medical examiner. You can't go back and redo an autopsy. That's going to create more problems than it will solve. You can't go back and make that medical examiner change her opinion. They're stuck with that. They're going to have to deal with it. But you can ask for new testing. You can go back to that vehicle's black box and say, you know what? We need to reanalyze this. That wasn't done properly before. It wasn't done as completely as it could have been before. And by the way, when we do this new analysis, we're going to have a new expert take a look at it. I think that is a very savvy move on the part of this new prosecutor. And there's not much really that the defense can do about it. They can get new experts themselves, and they'll be able to analyze the opinion by the prosecution's experts just like they had the first time around. But there isn't going to be that opportunity for them to present the old opinions from the first case. You cannot call a witness simply for the purpose of impeaching them. You cannot call those old experts and say, didn't you testify at a previous trial and say A, B, C, and D, and now the prosecution has changed their theory? They're going to be stuck with this new prosecution path. Unless I'm missing something, unless there's some sort of loophole that they're able to get in how the prosecution may have changed course, they're going to be stuck with this new analysis. And I can almost guarantee you that new analysis is going to be a lot more straightforward, a lot more easy to understand, do its job far better than they did the first time around. And it looks like we might even get some question of this dog bite expert that was called by the defense. You remember they brought in an expert, and I felt that that was very strong evidence on the part of the defense to say those injuries on John O'Keefe's arm were from a dog bite. And the prosecution, the Commonwealth, really didn't do much with it, didn't have much to impeach it with, didn't call their own expert. This time around, in the retrial with the new prosecutor and the new trial, he's saying, I'm going to take a look at that. I'm going to challenge that. I might want to have a hearing on that, Your Honor. And perhaps we will be hearing from William Reed, Karen's dad. Apparently she made phone calls to him around the time directly after this was supposed to have taken place. Now, are they going to call him to the stand? Are they just simply going to present the evidence that those phone calls were made? They're asking for information regarding the phone calls. By the way, there's no hearsay problems here. Anything she says is a party opponent admission. There was no attorney on the line at that time. They're going to have some, and believe me, this will be litigated, but they're going to have some troubles keeping that out. And what is Mr. William Reed going to say? Well, apparently he's already made some statements to the media which are problematic for the current defense strategy. Like I said, this is a whole new trial, a whole new prosecutor, a whole new ball of wax, what we're going to be dealing with here. The prosecution has completely reevaluated and reconstructed this case. Now, the question becomes, what is the defense going to do? They don't have to stick to that same theory. This doesn't have to still be about conspiracy theories and planted evidence and a cover-up. They could change their theory entirely as well. They've learned from this previous jury, if everything that we've heard about the way that the jury came out the first time around, that they found her not guilty of the murder, but were hung on the idea of her involvement. To me, the lesson to be learned from that is that the jurors may not have thought she meant to do it, but they also didn't entirely buy into this defense theory of a cover-up. What do you guys think? Do you think the defense needs to reevaluate their strategy, or don't switch horses when you're in the middle of a race? Stick to what quote unquote worked the first time around. Please let us know in the comments. Before we dive into the other cases making headlines this week, I'm going to ask you guys for one small favor, and that is, if you haven't already, please take a moment to subscribe to this channel now. We are so touched by the response from our growing community, and we look forward to providing you with more content, and the best way to do that is through your support. And don't forget to check out Courtroom Confidential as a podcast. Join our community on all major podcast platforms. Also making headlines, prosecutors in Philadelphia have delivered bad news to the family of a woman found dead from more than 20 stab wounds back in 2011, disclosing that no criminal charges are forthcoming in the case. Ellen Greenberg, a 27-year-old teacher, was found dead on January 26, 2011 by her fiancé, Samuel Goldberg, at their shared apartment. Greenberg was slumped against the cabinets, her legs splayed out in front of her. The beloved elementary school teacher had been stabbed at least 20 times, including multiple times in the back, neck, and the back of her head. A 10-inch knife was lodged in her chest. Philadelphia medical examiner Marlon Osborne initially ruled her death a homicide, but police considered her death a suicide and publicly challenged the findings, prompting her death to be reclassified as suicide without explanation. For more than a decade now, the Greenberg family has been fighting to finally get answers about what happened to her and to have her manner of death changed from suicide back to either homicide or undetermined. But now the Chester County District Attorney's Office has announced that it could not prove beyond a reasonable doubt that crime was committed, and so the investigation has been put into inactive status. There is no statute of limitations for criminal homicide in Pennsylvania, so charges could still be brought down the line. The defense team for the man accused of murdering 4 University of Idaho students in 2022 said Thursday that the judge should not permit the death penalty as punishment, arguing that the state has no real means of executing an inmate and the methods are unconstitutional. As the campus community prepares to mark 2 years since the quadruple homicide in the college town of Moscow, much of the discussion in court focused on the condition of the accused. Quote, "I don't believe our Constitution allows for us to move forward and make him sit in death row for years and years and years if the way Idaho is doing it right now isn't really working." And Taylor, Kohberger's public defender, said, "It's not a realistic option." So you're saying the anxiety of not knowing is a constitutional violation? Ada County District Court Judge Stephen Hippler asked. Taylor continued, "It is anxiety, it is fear, it is not knowing." Judge Hippler said he would issue a written ruling on the death penalty motion at a later date. Trial is currently set to begin in August of 2025. Brazilian nanny Juliana Perez Magalhães and her boss Brendan Banfield are accused of plotting to kill Brendan's wife Christine and Joseph Ryan, lured to Banfield's home in Herndon, Virginia, about 20 miles outside the capital. On the morning of February 24, 2023, police officers responded to 911 calls placed by the au pair and found a scene they would later describe as appalling. In a large home on a cul-de-sac, police found Christine Banfield, who had been stabbed in the upper body and would soon die of her injuries, and Ryan, who had been shot dead. Brendan Banfield, Magalhães, and Banfield's 4-year-old daughter were also at the scene unharmed. Police recovered a knife and 2 guns. Magalhães agreed to a plea deal last month where prosecutors downgraded the murder charge she had faced and agreed to recommend that she be released with credit for time served if she continues to cooperate with the authorities. Ms. Magalhães could still face up to 10 years in prison. Brendan Banfield was arrested in September, nearly a year after Magalhães, and his case will go to trial in February. He has been charged with aggravated murder in the killings of his wife, Christine Banfield, and Joseph Ryan. The husband of a San Antonio woman who has been missing for a month has been charged with murder. Brad Simpson is charged in the death of Suzanne Simpson, age 51, a mother of 4, who had last been seen outside her home by her neighbor in San Antonio on October 7th. According to a new affidavit released by authorities, the Texas real estate tycoon was seen driving with trash bags, a heavy-duty trash can, and a large, bulky item wrapped in a blue tarp as he searched for a dump the day after Suzanne vanished. Simpson was seen with the suspicious load soon after he bought cement and Clorox wipes the day after his wife of 22 years was last seen fighting with him outside their Almost Park home, followed by screams coming from the woods, according to authorities. The morning after the alleged fight, Simpson dropped off one of their 4 children at school and then pulled into a Whataburger parking lot where the 3 white trash bags, a large heavy-duty trash can, an ice chest, and a large bulky item tied down in a blue tarp were seen in the back of his truck. Suzanne's body has still not been found, despite a massive search effort at the landfill. Simpson is being held on a $5 million bond in Bexar County Jail. Argentinian investigators are still searching for answers for what led to former One Direction band member Liam Payne's death. On October 16, 2024, Payne fell to his death from a balcony at the Casa Sur Palermo Hotel in Buenos Aires. He was 31 years old. A press release from Argentina's public prosecutor on November 7th revealed that Payne's death was not being ruled as self-inflicted. The details of the situation rule out the possibility of a conscious or voluntary act, the statement explained. In the state he was in, he did not know what he was doing, nor could he understand it. The same day, 3 unnamed individuals were charged with abandonment leading to death in the supply and facilitation of narcotics. Investigators gathered information from hotel staff, family, and friends and reviewed more than 800 hours of footage from security cameras as part of the investigation, revealing what they describe as, quote, clear evidence of at least 4 instances of narcotics supply from third parties and other facilitation of addictive consumption by Payne's direct circle during his stay at the hotel between October 13th and 16th. A preliminary autopsy revealed that Payne had pink cocaine, a recreational drug mixing methamphetamine, ketamine, and MDMA, along with cocaine in his system. Before we get to what's on the docket for next week, I wanted to take a moment to thank you all for your support. The love from our growing community has been absolutely amazing, but we want to take a moment to give a special shout out to Pepper529 for their glowing review on Apple Podcasts, and to our newest members, Michelle Salter and Bucket Tree, for their kind words on YouTube. Keep them coming. We always highly appreciate your feedback. On the docket for next week, the man accused of murdering Georgia nursing student Laken Riley is facing life in prison without parole if convicted at trial. 22-year-old Riley was killed while jogging on the University of Georgia campus in February. Jose Ibarra has requested a bench trial, meaning only a judge will decide his fate, set to begin November 15th. And finally, please join us this coming Monday for our newest installment in our Courtroom Confidential Conversations series, where we speak with GiGi McKelvey of the podcast and YouTube channel Pretty Lies and Alibis. Please join us in the chat at 5 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Eastern. That is it for us this week, folks. I am your host, Joshua Ritter. You can find me on all social media at Joshua Ritter ESQ or at joshuaritter.com. Thank you again for joining me. Have a great weekend, and I will see you again next week for another episode of Courtroom Confidential.